Oh, hey there, I'm Sarah, a licensed New York City tour guide, and if you're here to learn about the shocking true stories of New York's most murderous area, then you have come to the right video. If you aren't ready for bloody stories of gang violence in Chinatown, then I recommend not watching this video because I will get into those nitty-gritty details, and maybe you want to check out my other 60+ guides on cool things to do in New York City, or watch my actual Chinatown guide of all the great things to do here. Now, many of the true stories I'm sharing here are from this lovely book. It's called The Gangs of New York. It was written in 1927 by Herbert Ashbury and chronicles the dark and often violent historical past of New York's gang history. Today, we're not only going to try to go into Chinatown's underground tunnels, but we're also going to be visiting what the NYPD called in this book, the place that more men have been murdered than any other place of like area in the world. Yeah, that's right. But to start, let's begin right here on Doyer Street. And I have a very special guest for today's video. It is Marcus. Marcus is one of my tour guides. He's also a radio show host, and he knows a ton about the gangster history in New York. Could you share some of the interesting gang history here and why this spot is known as the Bloody Angle?
This is this old off-the-grid New York street that maintained its shape, and that's a big part of the reason why it was so useful for gangsters.
This is technically the corner we're standing on, actually.
Right, and there's a lot of lore in the gangster culture that we learn. So you hear things like, hey, let's have a fair fight and may the best man win. So Tom Lee was known as the mayor of Chinatown. He was a big shot, though. He wasn't just a hard worker, he was a guy who had made some money and had connections back in the homeland. And he started what's now known as the An-Liang Chinese Merchants Association, but then was just known as the An-Liang Tong. Now, a merchants association or benevolent society sounds nice and friendly, and often they were. But in a neighborhood like this, where everyone's struggling to get by, sometimes you have to get connected to shady things, including Mr. Tom Lee. Why is it hilarious that he was known as the mayor of Chinatown? Because he helped people, of course, but he also ran opium dens, ran brothels, and ran gambling parlors. And in New York at the time, that didn't mean that he was gonna be in big trouble. And that was going smoothly until his young rival showed up, whose real name was Sai Wing Mok, but everyone knew him as Mok Duck. Why am I ducking? Because his gang move was to carry 2 pistols by his side at all times, and if something went down, he'd duck in the crouched position and fire in all directions. So a lot of the young Chinese in the neighborhood were inspired by his intensity, or he joined a group called the Hip Sing Tong Association, which became the rival to the An-Liang Tong Association, and that's when the violence really got out of hand.
One of the reasons there was so much violence in Chinatown was because it was a bachelor society. It was mostly all men.
And if you get a bunch of amped up men who work very hard and are kind of not really accepted into the culture that they live in,
They get a little feisty.
They get a little feisty.
They get a little angry.
So you always hear about a fight in the gang world, like, hey, let's go out into the open, have a fair fight, and may the best man win. And in fact, a much better way of a fight is to have it unfairly. And it's even better if you can have an unfair fight and no one sees you have an unfair fight because you're on Doyer Street. If you back someone up into Doyers, onto the Bloody Angle, and have 2 guys standing here waiting for him to put a hatchet in his back. So there's another rumor I heard, which is that the reason they like to fight here is because the ghost culture in China, they say that the ghosts can't go around corners.
No. In theory, that means all the ghosts would be here?
Yes, all the Chinese gangster ghosts that were murdered here are still hanging around.
How many people do you think were murdered in this corner?
I'm gonna say, based on what the books say, in the hundreds.
Now, in Gangs of New York, they're talking about inside of Nam Hua Tea Parlor right here, which is a lovely place to get dumplings, by the way, today. You wouldn't want to be here 100 years ago, though. They say that the society investigated only slightly the current tale that the basement has been used for years as a burying ground for Tong war members and victims, and made no alterations in the building except to give it a bath, wall up the entrances to the tunnels, those secret tunnels that we're gonna try to get into later, and remove the opium bunks from the cellar. So there's a really good chance that there's some bodies under the ground.
So not only
over
are the
there.
ghosts here, but the bodies themselves
Exactly.
are deteriorating somewhere around here.
Yeah, it's dark. Doing my research on this location, I came up with a very interesting legend. Are you ready to hear this?
I am.
Okay. A legend has it that one of the early Doyers buried a treasure of $35 million in gold in the walls of his house, which was located right here. And there's been much tapping and digging for hidden chambers, but without success. So I say we look around here and see if there's any places that we can get into.
How much money did you say was buried around here?
The book says 35 million, Marcus, so.
We've been up and down this block, which is obviously not as sketchy as it used to be, but
This door looks real suspicious.
if there was one place I had to pick that we've walked on the street where the 35 mil might be.
That is, there's like flies that just came out of it.
Ugh.
Ew.
Hey, there's a gold bar.
You know, there's another place that gold's buried that you can find on the Secrets of New York tour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every Saturday in Manhattan.
Saturday. There's like excrement on the ground and like the paint's peeling off everywhere. And the doorway is just covered in like graffiti. This door's open too. I'm like afraid to. Oh my God.
This is another door.
It's another door leading to a hallway. That's locked. I can't get further than that. That was really disturbing, and I'm pretty sure the $35 million is not there, and also that is not the entrance to the secret tunnels. Let's continue exploring, why don't we?
Here we are at the back entrance of what I know to be an old tunnel and escape route for the gangs, an opium den, a gambling parlor, and probably sometime brothel. I used to go in here about 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and I would just walk in.
Why would you go in here?
I was going to have an experience at a brothel, opium den, and gambling house.
Oh, okay,
No,
right.
because I was bringing tour groups down here very confidently and casually, as if it was a totally normal thing to do.
That's like the best way to get around New York. Just act like you belong in a location and be confident.
Walk into everywhere like you own the place, and you have a better chance of succeeding and doing what you want.
Look at that, Life Lessons by Marcus. All right, so this is where the tunnel's entrance is. It's Wing Fat Mansion, which I probably pronounced poorly.
They don't love visitors, so we'll try our best.
I've read that they really, really don't like visitors, so I'm assuming.
Even visitors as charming as us two.
佢好似5晚咧係好似like
$5 minutes.
5分鐘落下點數下5分鐘好快。
Okay.
It's okay.
Oh, yay, thank you.
So we made it, which
Yay.
is exciting.
Very exciting.
And as I said, this is a place where people could escape. This is a very old building. I'm sure it's been updated since the Tong War days.
Oh my gosh, there's so many random things in here. It's like offices with paper everywhere.
Yeah, so you can smell some Chinese herbs. And allegedly, these in the early days when this was built were opium dens and
These were all opium dens.
yes, and perhaps where some gambling and brothel type activity took place.
Interesting, and it's like very obvious that you don't come down here unless you speak Mandarin.
This is not what you would say a long tunnel. It goes from one end to the other.
Right.
And I'm thinking in the early days it went beyond where we're seeing just here.
Right, I think part of it's closed off from what I've read.
But
So
we're
this is
lucky
just a
that we
portion.
still have this small version of it to remind us of
for
all
sure.
the amazing history,
For sure.
whether
And
it's shady or not.
oh, super shady, and that's what this video is all about, being shady. Oh, you see what I did there? Okay, so we are at the final destination. This is the 5 Points, and this is what Charles Dickens called the greatest pigsty of them all. This is where more murders happen, more crime happen, more death happen than anywhere else in the area besides the Bloody Angle or Doyer Street. Marcus, could you tell us a little bit about the history of this area? Because I know you know a lot about it.
I can tell you a lot about it.
Oh, perfect.
Behind us is now lovely Columbus Park. It's a great place to visit. It used to be a pond. This was called the Collect Pond. It was the water source in Dutch days. This was beyond the city limits, and it got really dirty and filthy, so they filled it in with dirt and the rich people downtown said, we'll put the poor people on the diseased, disgusting, dirty part of Manhattan that exists just outside the city limits, and that's what they did, and the first slum in America was born. There was a long history of forming secret society groups and underground business communities, etc., to get around that authority.
Like the Dead Rabbits or the Bowery Boys, for example, that you see in Gangs of New York.
These gangs here are an offshoot of that exact culture.
Yeah.
When the Irish got to America, they had been told, like many others, that the streets are paved with gold. This was the slum. They were poor. They were discriminated against. They were treated as lesser than.
Yeah.
So they bonded together in the same way that they had back in the old country, where you could argue many of them were treated the same way. This and the East End of London were the two most crowded, populated urban neighborhoods on the planet. So people were living literally on top of one another.
There was actually underground caves that people were creating homes in underneath buildings that were already overcrowded. And was this an area that you would really have a lot of fighting and violence? Like in Gangs of New York, they really portrayed it like that.
Yes, for sure. The Irish were used to being discriminated against, and when they received poor treatment in the New World, which they hadn't been expecting, they got pretty resentful pretty quickly. Their original enemies were nativists, descendants of the original English, Dutch, etc., who had been in New York for a few generations. They actually called themselves the Know-Nothings. They would say things like, where's that political meeting you're attending? I don't know nothing. And the character of Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, the movie, represents this group.
This whole area was just loaded with gangs, in addition to the Chinatown gangs.
Right, and the Irish gangs were pretty unique because they weren't just tough guys who beat each other up. Like in Chinatown, having a commercial interest in controlling territories.
Yes.
There was a lot of taverns, pubs.
Oh yeah, there's actually a brewery on the corner right over here, and it said that there was a murder every single night for 10 years in that brewery. This area isn't just known for its past illicit activity. Today, all of these people behind us are gambling. And the funniest part to me is that right over there are all the government buildings. So they don't care that they're doing something illegal right in front of a government building. They just do it.
It's almost
anyway.
like the old days.
It's
You
literally
grease
like
a few
the old
palms, you tell everybody this is ours, and some people might look the other way.
That's right, and that's what happens here. Well, thank you so much, Marcus, for sharing all that amazing knowledge.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate all your gangster tidbits and history and fun facts. You can do private tours with Marcus. You can do the Secret of New York tour with Marcus. Check out his links below. If you want to do a more extensive gangster tour, he knows a lot about it. But,
We can get to all the other eras,
all the
including
other
Italian gangsters, Jewish gangsters.
If you guys want us to do a video on the mafia history of New York, comment below and let us know. So that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.